Aliens left me with countless moments that were both exhilarating and terrifying. I still remember the tension when the alarm sirens blared through the metallic corridors, Ripley pausing for a single beat before saying, "Get away from her." And then the gunfire began to ricochet off steel walls. Even back then, we understood that this was not just an action movie, but something far greater. But the more I revisit it, the more I realise that what makes Aliens truly great isn't confined to what appears on screen. It lies in what we never see. An alien queen that looks like an ultimate creature, but was in reality once just a garbage bag hanging from a crane. A drug bust that completely altered the casting of a key character. And a child star who stepped into film history, then vanished forever after a single role. And here are 20 strange facts you may never have known about Aliens 1986. A perfect film forged out of chaos. 20. Aliens almost didn't have Ripley. There is one image that left a deep impression on me the first time I saw Aliens. It wasn't the alien itself, but Ripley standing upright amid the chaos, so calm it seemed to silence the entire room. Back then, I never thought of Ripley as a character. She felt like a necessity, as if without her, the film simply could not exist. Yet the truth is, there was a moment when Aliens nearly had no Ripley at all. When James Cameron pitched the sequel to 20th Century Fox, the studio did not see Ripley as a given. The reason boiled down to two cold words: money. Sigourney Weaver wanted a salary that reflected her stature. Fox hesitated. To them, Ripley was an expense that could be cut. To Cameron, still a rising director fresh off The Terminator, Ripley was the heart of the film. When the studio suggested writing Ripley out of the script, Cameron made a move that nearly amounted to career suicide. He threatened to walk away. A young director standing up to an entire studio, convinced that this film could not exist without that woman. In the end, Fox backed down. Weaver received around $1 million, an astonishing figure at the time. Cameron kept Ripley, and the gamble paid off. Aliens became a box office triumph. Sigourney Weaver earned an Academy Award nomination for Best Actress, almost unheard of for a sci-fi action film. The strongest character in the movie was nearly cut for the weakest reason of all: money. 19. A child with no acting experience and a disappearance from Hollywood. If you remember Aliens only for its guns and screams, you're missing its most frightening element: Newt's silence. A child who whispers, staring into the darkness as if she has lived there for far too long. It feels less like acting and more like a memory. What's astonishing is that Carrie Henn had never acted a day in her life before Aliens. The casting team searched everywhere for Newt, but the more they looked among professional child actors, the more they realised something was missing. The quality Cameron needed: a child who looked as though she had lived through something without having to say a word. They eventually found Carrie in the last place anyone expected: an elementary school in England, where she was living because her father was stationed at a US Air Force base near the RAF. Carrie had what Cameron called the right face expressive eyes, an uncanny calm, and a quiet gravity that felt like someone holding on to secrets. On screen, she didn't act afraid. She simply existed inside fear. That natural presence is what made Newt one of the most haunting images in sci-fi history. But the strangest part of the story lies beyond the film. Despite winning a Saturn Award and receiving widespread praise, Carrie chose to leave Hollywood and return to a normal life. She said she wanted friends who liked her for who she was. Not for a name on a poster. Carrie grew up, studied child development, and became a teacher. She occasionally appears at conventions smiling with fans, and perhaps because she disappeared so early, Newt remains frozen in our memory, a perfect performance untouched by any other role that might have diluted it. 18. The Colonial Marines were trained like a real military unit. The first time I watched Aliens, I kept thinking, these soldiers talk like real people. They felt like a group that had survived together. And that feeling wasn't movie magic. It wasn't accidental. James Cameron wanted the Marines to feel like a unit that had fought side by side for years, the way they stood, the way they handled their weapons, the way they swore all of it needed history. So before filming began, he sent the entire cast through a week-long boot camp run by Al Matthews, a Vietnam War veteran who also played Sergeant Apone. There were no movie stars there, only people being shouted at, corrected, forced to learn discipline. They trained with weapons-practiced formations and learned to respond instantly to commands. That exhaustion produced exactly what Cameron needed, a bond that wasn't acted. On screen, a single glance or throwaway joke is enough to convince you they are long-time comrades. The bitter irony, however, was this. While the actors were learning military discipline behind the camera, Cameron himself was about to enter another battle, not with aliens, but with the working culture at Pinewood Studios. And it would explode over something that sounds harmless enough, afternoon tea. 17. The Alien Queen began as trash. Do you remember the first time you saw the Alien Queen on screen? She emerges as something supreme, towering, massive, every movement carrying weight, as if the entire room must make way for her. I used to think this must have been the most expensive special effects miracle Hollywood could afford at the time. But in reality, the Alien Queen began her life as garbage bags. When Cameron told Stan Winston that he wanted a 14-foot-tall creature operated by real people and capable of moving with enough life to genuinely terrify audiences, Winston's first reaction was blunt: the guy was crazy. No one had ever built a creature puppet on that scale that could still convincingly perform. So Stan Winston Studios did what the best effects artists always do before believing in a crazy idea. They tested it using the cheapest materials possible. They built a prototype nicknamed the Garbage Bag Queen. The materials sounded like a joke: black garbage bags for skin foam, core for the structure, and ski poles for arms and claws. They hung it from a crane and stuffed 2 stunt performers inside to test the movement. It looked nothing like the Queen in the finished film, but when it moved, when that patched-together body still felt threatening, everyone understood Cameron's idea wasn't insane. It was just so difficult that no one had dared try it before. The experiment became legendary within the studio. The garbage bag test turned into shorthand for any ambitious project that followed. From there, they moved on to the real thing, a 14-foot-tall Queen 2 operators inside the arms, plus around 16 people controlling hydraulics, cables and levers. A monster born from trash, yet one that became a permanent icon of cinema. 16. James Remar was fired over drugs. In many people's memories, Corporal Hicks is the moral backbone of the Marines, quiet, steady, dependable, and one of the few calm enough to stand beside Ripley. But few know that Hicks almost had a different face, and the change had nothing to do with artistic choice. It was a genuine behind-the-scenes explosion. Originally, the role of Hicks went to James Remar. He was cast, shot several scenes, and even wore armour tailored to his body. On paper, everything worked, a tough, no-nonsense soldier, classic Hollywood casting. Then suddenly, Remar vanished from the film, as if he had never existed. Years later, Remar admitted the truth. He was fired after being arrested on drug-related charges while the film was shooting in England. And for a production already stretched to the breaking point by cultural clashes at Pinewood, this was something they simply could not tolerate. But the trouble didn't end there. Remar was also linked to an incident that sounds almost impossible on a film set. While handling a prop shotgun, he allegedly brought real ammunition instead of blanks. The gun accidentally discharged, blasting a hole straight through a studio wall. On the other side of that wall, another film crew was working, Little Shop of Horrors, directed by Frank Oz. One gunshot punched a hole between 2 worlds, and for a brief moment, the most dangerous thing at Pinewood wasn't an alien, but human negligence that could have killed someone. 15. Game Over Man was completely improvised. Some lines seem destined to be printed on t-shirts. The interesting thing is that the lines that last the longest are often not written in the script. They come from an actor's survival instincts in the exact right moment. "Game over, man. Game over." That line was never written. In the script, Hudson was simply meant to panic. But Bill Paxton understood the character in a very human way. Hudson isn't a monumental hero. He's a frontline soldier, loud, cocky when things are under control, and the first to crack when he realises he's been utterly overmatched. So during the take, Paxton blurted out the line, raw, desperate, like the cry of someone who has just realised there is no winning path left. Cameron heard it and immediately kept it, because it captured something scripts often can't. A line that's funny, tragic and chilling all at once. And the line lived on. It's been quoted in parodies, memes and video games because it hits the most universal human feeling when facing something far bigger than yourself, the moment you stop thinking you're the main character and accept that you're just a very small human inside a very large nightmare. 14. The tea trolley and the mutiny at Pinewood. Some films nearly die because of accidents, explosions, or lack of money. Aliens was different. It nearly died because of tea. When Cameron arrived at Pinewood Studios, he stepped into a system governed by British tradition. Mandatory tea breaks twice a day, no matter what scene was being shot, no matter how complex the effects set up. The tea trolley rolled out like a small religious ritual on set. For Cameron, who favoured marathon shooting days, it was a nightmare. For the British crew, many of them veterans of massive productions, it was a long-established rite. They had no intention of changing decades-old schedules for a young Canadian director. They even gave him the nickname Grizzly Adams, mocking his beard, and implicitly his outsider status. "You're here, so you follow our rules." The breaking point came when first assistant director Derek Cracknell publicly sided with the crew defending the tea breaks and refusing to help Cameron push the schedule. Cameron saw this as a direct challenge to his authority. And he did something that was almost taboo at Pinewood. He fired Cracknell on the spot in front of everyone. The reaction was immediate. The crew collectively walked off set, a true mutiny, something nearly unheard of in the famously polite British film industry. Some accounts even say Cameron was so furious he nearly lunged at the elderly woman pushing the tea trolley, though she was only doing her daily job. A film about survival against monsters nearly brought down by an everyday habit. 13. The facehugger is terrifying because it was entirely real. I still vividly remember a very specific kind of fear when I first watched Aliens, not the gunfire, not the screams, but the moment I saw the facehugger move. It jerked, clung, and felt deeply wrong, like a creature that should not exist. The reason is simple. It was real. At the time, CGI was practically unusable for complex creatures. Cameron didn't want the alien to look like something created in a special effects lab. He wanted something that would trigger genuine reactions from the actors. The facehugger was built in multiple versions. Some had wheels so they could race across the floor. Others were wire-controlled, with each finger moving independently to create an insect-like gripping motion. Some were used only for close-ups, twitching subtly just enough to make audiences shudder. Cameron was also obsessed with texture. He insisted they look wet because living creatures always have moisture and an unpleasant reflective sheen. The props were coated with gel lubricants and even condoms to create a stretchy membrane with veins rising to the surface as the lights swept across them. And precisely because they were so real, so physical, facehuggers still make audiences uncomfortable today, in a way that modern effects sometimes fail to achieve. 12. Bill Paxton apologised for swearing in front of Newt. If you pay attention, Hudson is Alien's loudspeaker of profanity. He talks constantly, loudly, recklessly, like a soldier using language to mask fear. But behind the camera, Bill Paxton was a very different person. Throughout filming, every time Hudson unleashed a string of swearing in front of Newt Paxton, apologised to Carrie Henn. That might sound amusing in a movie filled with death, blood and monsters, but for Paxton, the thing that bothered him most was language. Carrie was only 9 or 10 years old, and he didn't want her exposed to anything unnecessary. And Carrie. Years later, she said she never minded at all because she didn't understand what any of Hudson's words meant. To her, they were just sounds adults made when they were stressed, nothing more. That contrast is fascinating, a grown man so conscientious that he kept apologising and a child completely untouched by the adult world around her. It perfectly reflects the spirit of aliens in the middle of hell. What keeps people human is their awareness of others. 11. The 3-story slide and negotiating with James Cameron. The scene of Newt in the ventilation shafts is one of the most tense moments in the film. On screen, it's panic darkness and the feeling of being hunted. But for Carrie Henn, it was also a fantastic playground. The vents were built tall, long and smooth. To a child, they were basically a giant slide, and Carrie realised this almost immediately. During filming, she deliberately ruined takes by sliding incorrectly or stopping in the wrong place, forcing retakes. The reason was simple: she wanted to slide again. For Cameron, this was a problem because shooting time was expensive. But as a director who understood human psychology, especially children, he chose a different approach. Cameron made Carrie a very James Cameron deal. If you do the scene properly, you can act however you want afterward. Carrie agreed. She did it right. And Cameron kept his word. That moment says a lot about how Aliens was made. It wasn't just iron discipline. It was negotiation between production pressure and human emotion. A film about survival kept alive behind the scenes by very small compromises. 10. The Alien Queen's roar is James Cameron. Have you noticed that the Alien Queen's roars don't sound like any creature on Earth? They're not fully animal, not quite mechanical. They sound like conscious rage. The truth is, they came from the director himself. During post-production, when the sound team searched for a voice for the Queen, Cameron wasn't satisfied with sound libraries or animal recordings. He wanted something intentional, something emotional, so he stepped into the recording booth himself. Cameron recorded his own roars, hisses and screams into a microphone, raw, very human sounds, which the sound team then distorted, stretched and blended with animal noises to create the Queen's voice. The idea is both absurd and perfect. The man shouting orders on set is also the monster screaming on screen. But that's very Cameron. He's the kind of director who does whatever is necessary. He performs stunts, he rewrites dialogue on the spot, he handles equipment, and when he needs a monster that roars because it feels threatened, he becomes it. There's a beautiful symmetry here. Ripley faces the Queen while Weaver faces Cameron. Both are confrontations of will-not special effects. 9. Hadley's Hope was designed like an Antarctic station. When we think of the Hadley's Hope colony, we usually remember dark corridors, cold fluorescent lighting, and the feeling that everything had been dead long before the alien ever appeared. What's striking is that atmosphere didn't come from sci-fi imagination, it came from real life. James Cameron instructed the design team to draw direct inspiration from Antarctic research stations, places where people live for months at a time completely cut off from the world. There is no flashy aesthetic there, only function, metal, procedures, and a numbing repetition. Hadley's Hope was built as a place meant to survive, not to live. Small rooms, low ceilings, long corridors, so similar you could easily get lost. No bright colours, no unnecessary decoration. Everything conveys the same message: if you get stuck here, you're truly stuck. That very ordinariness makes the horror more frightening. The alien doesn't destroy a sleek futuristic city. It invades a place where you can easily imagine real people working, eating and living, and then turns it all into a graveyard. 8. Bishop's knife trick drew real blood. The scene where Bishop demonstrates his superhuman reflexes by rapidly stabbing a knife between Hudson's fingers is one that makes audiences laugh and tense up at the same time. But few people know that real blood was spilled on set. The first thing to note is that this scene wasn't in the original script. It was conceived right on set. Lance Henriksen Bishop rehearsed it beforehand. Bill Paxton Hudson did not. Cameron deliberately avoided explaining exactly what would happen, so Paxton's reaction would be genuine, not acted. The tension on screen was therefore real tension. According to Henriksen, the scene was shot the morning after a farewell party just before the crew flew back to Los Angeles. In other words, the man holding the knife had to perform with absolute precision while possibly still feeling the after effects of the night before. The first take went smoothly, but on the second take, Paxton accidentally moved his little finger into the knife's path at the exact moment the blade came down. The knife hit his hand and blood flowed. That take was kept, an iconic moment paid for with a drop of real blood. 7. Sigourney Weaver's Death Flowers. In the middle of a film filled with death, Sigourney Weaver created a strange tradition giving flowers to actors on the day their characters died. The idea sounds both dark and warm. For Weaver, it came from something very human. She was the most experienced person on set, while for many younger actors this was their first major film. And shooting a death scene, especially a brutal one, is not emotionally easy. The bouquets were her way of saying you've just completed the hardest part of your job. Your character may be torn apart on screen, but you, the actor, are valued. Over time, the death flowers became a ritual. The last day of shooting was no longer just about packing up. It became a marked milestone. Weaver would often hand over the flowers with a half-joking, half-serious line, "Oh, today's your day." Eventually, actors began to look forward to the bouquet like a quiet graduation ceremony. A reminder that even in a film about survival, what helps people endure is small acts of kindness toward one another. 6. The score was written overnight. If you've ever felt the final act of Aliens pounding like an uncontrollable heartbeat, there's a reason. The music for Ripley's showdown with the Queen was written under near-crisis conditions. James Horner arrived in London with a perfectly normal expectation, 6 weeks to compose the score-standard Hollywood procedure. But Cameron was still editing the film with no locked cut. 6 weeks immediately shrank to 3. Worse still, every time Horner finished a cue, Cameron changed the editing rhythm, forcing him to start over. The breaking point came with the final sequence. Horner received the cut so late that he had to stay up all night writing the entire climax just in time for the orchestra to record it the next morning. No revisions, no experimentation, just instinct and pressure. After the film, Horner flatly declared that he would never work with Cameron again, calling the experience a nightmare. But Hollywood is strange. Years later, the same two men would go on to create Titanic and Avatar, music born from calm after a night of chaos. 5. The Marines in the film are historically inaccurate. Years after Aliens became a classic, James Cameron did something rare. He publicly apologized to the United States Marine Corps. He admitted that when he wrote and shot the film, he didn't truly understand how the Marine Corps operates. The Colonial Marines were built from stereotypes and pop culture images of Vietnam-era soldiers, not from real military practice. In the film, Marines argue with officers, show open attitude toward commanders, and behave like an undisciplined group. To real Marines, famous for strict discipline and an ironclad chain of command, that behaviour is almost unthinkable. Cameron later said that real-world Marines are far more professional than what he portrayed, and he wanted to correct the record, not to apologise for the film, but out of respect for the real people who had inspired him in the wrong way when he was younger. 4. The APC nearly killed the crew. On screen, the APC charges forward powerfully solid as a rolling fortress. In reality, it was one of the most dangerous things on set. The production used a real military vehicle and it repeatedly malfunctioned. The most serious incident occurred when the brakes failed completely. The APC lost control and slammed straight into an expensive camera rig. The terrifying part is this: if a camera operator had been standing there, it could have been fatal. Fortunately, producer Gail Ann Hurd had decided to operate the camera remotely, a small technical choice that almost certainly saved lives. And it didn't end there. On another occasion, the driver forgot the vehicle was in reverse. When he tried to move forward, the APC suddenly shot backward, nearly hitting James Cameron and the cinematographer standing behind it. These incidents added to the already taut atmosphere of Aliens, a film about survival made under conditions where the crew themselves were surviving day by day. 3. The guns in the film were real modified weapons. One reason Aliens still feels so heavy and forceful today is that the guns weren't fake. The Pulse rifle was built from a World War II era Thompson submachine gun with a shotgun mounted underneath. The Smart gun was even more extreme, based on the German MG42 mounted onto a Steadicam rig so it could swivel like a human turret. The result was weapons that were heavy, loud, and kicked hard. The actors felt the weight, heard the explosions, and reacted instinctively. Cameron believed that real guns create real reactions, and that belief gave every gunshot in Aliens a physicality that CGI still struggles to replace. 2. The Ripley-Newt mother-daughter bond was real. The relationship between Ripley and Newt didn't exist only on screen. In real life, Sigourney Weaver genuinely cared for Carrie Henn like a mother. Amid the intense shooting schedule, Weaver protected her, guided her, and made sure Carrie always felt safe. That bond meant the rescue scenes didn't need extra acting. The emotion was already there. Years later, the two remained in contact. Carrie has said that Weaver was one of the most important adults in her life. That's why when Ripley says, "Come here, sweetheart," the audience believes it not because of the script, but because the feeling was real. 1. Aliens broke Oscar barriers. Few would expect a ferocious sci-fi action film like Aliens to make it to the Oscars, but it did. The film received 7 nominations and won 2 awards, including Best Visual Effects. More importantly, Suzanne M. Benson became the first woman in history to win an Oscar in that category, a quiet milestone, but a groundbreaking one. Aliens didn't just defeat monsters on screen, it defeated the prejudice that sci-fi is just entertainment. And that's why this film didn't merely survive, it left a legacy. On screen, Aliens looks like a perfect machine. Behind the scenes, it was a mixture of risk mistakes, instinct, and a belief that if you push far enough, what remains will be truth. Perhaps that's why, nearly 40 years later, Aliens still doesn't feel old. It doesn't just tell a story about monsters from space, it tells a story about how humans face fear, responsibility, and each other. Was there a detail in Aliens you'd never noticed before? Or is there another film you'd like to revisit from behind the camera? Leave your thoughts below and don't forget to like, share and subscribe so we can meet again in future videos.